Welcome to the Be Empowered podcast with your host, Graham Hopkins. My goal is to help you regain your power by bridging the gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are. In simple language, that is like making your childhood dreams come true. This is for those who want to make an impact in their lives but don't know how to get there. Be ensured, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world.
Welcome everybody to the Be Empowered show. My name's Graham Hopkins, I'm your host, and today we have a very special guest. I've known Adam Shaw for a number of years now, and to be honest, I've always looked up to Adam. He's a natural in everything that he does, so especially with presenting on videos, and the work that he does is also admirable. And so Adam, I'd like to welcome you to the Be Empowered show.
Thanks, Graham. A pleasure to be here as ever.
So as we were just discussing, Adam, the last I knew of you, you were known as the heart guy. Does that still resonate with a lot of your friends? Are you still the heart guy?
Well, I am still the heart guy. I've kept the heart guy for my LinkedIn profile, so people probably look at it and wonder, where I've done my best to explain that as I can. Being the heart guy, because I work with a lot of people with heart attacks and got very good at helping them through that and working on the psychology of it. In the last 18 months, I've moved into ACE funding in the corporate sector, where we're introducers for great opportunities. We present them to funders for auctions and events.
Cool. So, Anna, before we go there, can you just fill me in again and remind me of your upbringing and how that got you involved in the things that you did for many years?
Oh, thanks, Graham. Well, there's a question. Where do I begin? Okay, I'll give you the very brief potted version. My parents were both psychiatric nurses, so I grew up in the grounds of a lunatic asylum. We were in the staff accommodation, which was on site. So we saw a lot of interesting things growing up. So I guess it could be argued I've been surrounded by health and well-being issues all my life. I then left that. I worked in a restaurant, then in a merchant bank for a couple of years. That I just wanted to backpack. I wanted to get out and see the world. I did that for a bit and then fell into nursing. So I spent over 13 years as a nurse, and then as an individual well-being consultant. So it could be argued that all of my life, barring possibly the last 18 months where I've been working predominantly on ACE funding, that I've been in the health and well-being profession.
So what's it like being brought up in a institution like that? I mean, do you start getting affected with those around you?
Don't really think about it, Graham. You know, it was normal to me. I never questioned it. It's just normal practice. I'd look out the door sometimes and there'd be patients urinating, or sometimes a bit more on the front lawn, or knocking the door asking for cigarettes in their nightgowns with no dentures, and sort of going to and fro like this. It was very interesting. But the beauty of that environment is that everyone knew each other. So unlike today, we were able to go out and play with our friends without our parents having to worry too much, because all of the staff knew each other in the hospital, and they didn't let anybody loose that was going to do any harm to anyone. It was more likely the other way around. Us as kids, we were a bit curious and maybe not the most holistic approach to patient interaction at that time in my life.
I actually had an auntie who had she had a relationship with a guy around about 21, 22 years of age, which didn't turn out. And then she became bitter and frustrated, and she ended up, they assigned her to a mental home, and she stayed there for probably 70 years of her life, 60 years, because she died when she was 90. And I remember as a child going to this mental home and sitting outside the grounds while my parents went in to see her. And yeah, it was just such a shame that she was sentenced to that role by the state. But I really doubt whether, she was actually mental. I think she became mental by going into the home. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but yeah, I mean, can people become used to the environment they're in and then feel trapped that they're actually in there?
It's a very good question, Graham. I feel for your aunt, because we got to see a lot of patients in our time, and some of them were put in there back in the 30s and the 40s, and for the crime of getting pregnant outside of marriage,
Yeah.
which back in that time, that era, was criminal. You weren't allowed to do it. Some of them even from the 20s, when I think about it. So you go in that environment, and of course, if you spend enough time on strong medication, I mean, that dulls the senses, of course, which is what they do to most people with psychiatric problems. It's not an exact science. It's a let's try this approach. It's not like medical, where we know what causes the pain, we know what drug we can give that's going to stop that. With psychiatric issues, it's almost like a lottery. They've got certain drugs with certain remits that they try people on, and unfortunately, you will see people that will start dribbling all over themselves because the drugs are strong, and that makes them look far worse than they actually are. So, I feel sorry for anyone that was put into that environment for ridiculous things, which they did. We saw some tragic cases. I mean, some people deserve to be there, others really didn't. And it's difficult not to become institutionalized if you're put in that. You put in if you put an eagle in with the chickens, will it ever fly? And it's much the same of being institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember the movie Midnight Express. It's an old movie now, but it was about an American who got caught for smuggling drugs in Istanbul, in Turkey, and he ended up in the jail system there. And a part of their daily procedure was to walk clockwise around a pole. And after a period of time, maybe a year or so, he got the opportunity to have his girlfriend visit him for just a very short period of time. But that triggered something in him, and when he went back into that room, he started walking anti-clockwise against everybody. And it was that one thing that led to his, he eventually broke out of the jail. And it was a true story. There was a movie made about it. Yeah. But it was that fact that he actually went against the system, if you like. And that's what brought his freedom.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You see all sorts of things, people in there. I mean, we used to give a lot of medication to a lot of people, and I mean, in my younger and more naive years, it is very entertaining talking to people who do have psychiatric problems. I used to spend a long time talking to a lot of people who were clearly delusional, and whilst that can be amusing in a certain context, it is quite tragic as well. That people will form stories, they'll form a life that didn't ever exist, and then you'll speak to their relatives and hear the reality, or at least their reality of the version of the story. So there is a tragedy there, but I think for a lot of people who have things like Alzheimer's especially, and dementia, that the true victims of things like that are the families. because often the people with the psychiatric illness are not aware of it, or they're not in a place where they're feeling any sort of empathy. They're not really feeling for their family. They're in a zone of self-absorption, if you like. Whereas the family know the old person, and they see this new person that's been completely drugged up, that has been caught in a system, and it's very difficult for the families. So often, as a healthcare professional, it was the families we predominantly had to look after. Whilst we did provide the care, of course we did for the patients. From the psychology of it, it is devastating for people to watch their loved ones degenerate like that.
So, Adam, just let's go back to your history. You spent about 20 years it was 13 years as a qualified nurse, yeah? Then you went on specialising in psychology of what you call psychology of heart health. And it was through that you became known as the heart guy.
Yeah.
Can you fill us in on that journey?
Well, that was a good one. It's a good question, Graham. And when that question's so open-ended, I could give you a hugely long version. Let me try and make it as succinct as I can. I used to work before. My specialist area was working with the dying. And when people used to get diagnosed with terminal illness, the doctors would waltz off the ward, and that left me with that question of, is there any hope? And that really triggered a journey for me personally. Having to look at someone that's just been given a death sentence and not offer them any hope was a spark for me on my wellbeing journey. I thought, surely there's hope. Surely there's something you can do for people once they hit that point, because that's one of the toughest things that's ever going to happen to anyone. When you've been given a time bomb, a date, you'll be dead within 2 weeks. It's a devastating remit to hand out. And so I got involved in a lot of things. The first thing was Reiki. And to cut that story short, I had a profound experience dealing with Reiki, where I ended up in a lot of pain myself. My heart started getting worse each time I did healing on it. And I was very cynical, very, very cynical about Reiki. I left the course. I was doubting the guy that taught it. I questioned his integrity. Too much woo-woo language for me. It just seemed a little bit too out there for someone that was medically trained. And then a series of mad coincidences occurred where I decided, okay, well, I'll do Reiki on myself, which I did. And it led me to a place where I ended up in extreme chest pain, but it was a dull ache. It wasn't your classic symptoms of angina. And although it was getting worse each time I worked on it, I knew that that I had to go through this intuitively, and it's difficult to explain to anyone not in touch with their intuition, because I really wasn't at the time. Something told me that I had to go through this process. So even though I was doing healing on myself every night, the pain was getting worse. It led me to this place of catharsis. I had this, I'd seen it for people. I'd worked with the dying who'd been flatlined. They'd died, they'd come back to life. And everyone that's been through that process has some sort of profound shift. And one of the things that people used to say was, I saw my life flash before me. I thought, how can you possibly have a lifetime flash before you in a couple of minutes? It's not possible. Or even a couple of seconds. And then it happened to me. Although I was physically fit and I was working on a coronary care ward at the time, I realized that emotionally I was quite stunted. That our family weren't very close. We didn't used to hug each other. The word love was about as alien as you can possibly get. The idea of it was just, well, I didn't have any, I didn't really have any barometer of which to measure love. Our family were a little bit different, so busy looking after everyone else's problems at work and not really dealing with their own at home. And that was my experience growing up. So I realized in this moment that I'd never told any of my family that I loved them. Well, I hadn't done for years and years, decades. And I suddenly realized if anything happened to them, one of the hardest things from working with families at the end of their lives is they don't say the things to their loved ones while they had the chance, and then one day they're dead. And I realized that if I was to die that day, nobody knew anything that I felt. So I went round for 3 days. It was a bit like Scrooge on Christmas morning. And I told all of my family that I loved them. And each time I did that, it got a little bit, the pain got a little bit less, you know, big tears and catharsis. And of course, both my parents individually thought I was on drugs to be in this zone where I'm telling them that I love them. You know, they thought I'd moved up a class. It must be the class A's you're on now, Adam. I'm really concerned for you. No, Mum, I really do love you. This isn't some sort of drug-induced joke. It's a real process. I do mean it. And so we went through this awkward moment between me and my parents, and it was awkward because they didn't really know how to handle it. And there's me turning up in tears, giving them a hug, telling them how much I love them. It was quite a interesting experience. But what that brought me to believe and to realize is that the root of the psychology of heart disease is our inability to express love in our daily lives. Not telling the people that mean the most to us that we love them. Often that manifests in arguments when we can't do that. And I saw it as a nurse when people come into A&E, somebody's just died, somebody they loved, and the last thing that happened was an argument. And when you've seen that devastation repeatedly, you realize that that it's important to tell everybody that you love them regularly, and it really is that simple.
Do you think that we have to love ourselves before we have anything to give?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's where the root of all heart disease happens, when we can't look in the mirror and love the person that's looking back to us. If you want to know if you're at risk at any disease, especially heart disease and cancer, strokes, all are in the same sort of branch. I mean, every major progressively degenerative disease can always be traced back to how much do I love myself.
I saw a quote on Facebook the other day. It said, Jesus said, love your enemies. So I looked at myself in the mirror and started loving myself.
That's very funny, because we are our own worst enemies. It's that talking that goes on in the back of our heads that no one else can hear, where we're sabotaging our confidence, we're sabotaging our ability to attract things. Everything stems from that point. So very, very very wise thing to do there, Graham. Very profound.
So this show, the Be Empowered show, is all about feeling connected. The reality is that we are connected, but we don't perceive ourselves as being connected. So how does that fit into what you've learnt on this journey?
That's a very good question, and interesting. I could answer that several different ways. I think for me, being connected, the first thing to be connected is being connected with yourself. To love yourself enough to look after yourself so that you can be the person that you would want to attract, for example. A lot of people will raise their game when they fall in love. They'll start losing weight. They'll start feeling better about themselves. They'll start exercising more because they found someone they love. And if they're not doing that for themselves, if they're doing it for someone else more than themselves, which is often the case, then we're already on the route to disease, because it has to come from a place of, it doesn't matter whether there's anyone else in my life or not. It doesn't matter if I met my soulmate. This is me. When we go back to Midnight Express, if you're sat in that jail cell on your own, you've got no one else. You have to find the inner resources from within, and nobody can give you that. People can talk about it. People can give you advice. People can actually be the energy of that. Really advanced gurus, say the Dalai Lama, for example. But the only person that can really give you that is yourself.
So, Adam, you've been you've been brought up in a psychiatric hospital or living on the grounds, 13 years as a qualified nurse. Can you, now that you're looking back, can you be definite that our diseases come from something like it's an energy that's driving us inside of us that manifests itself? Is that the way you see it?
It's a complicated question, Graham, because it would always, I've been very good at seeing both sides of every argument, for example. And the argument always is, what about kids that are born with terrible diseases? You know, what did they do to deserve it? There's all sorts of spiritual debates that can explain that phenomenon. So this is not it's not a one-size-fits-all answer that I'm going to give now, and I feel I do need to pre-frame that. What I will say is that anybody that wasn't born with crippling degenerative illness and spent most of their life without one and then suddenly forms one, disease, strokes, cancer especially, I would go as far to say that is definitely a psychological issue, probably based around anger towards themselves, their parents, their loved ones, and or their job. These are huge indicators of people who are at risk of developing disease. And when we hold on to our anger and our bitterness for long enough, that will manifest in a progressively degenerative illness or something even more acute, a heart attack. And that's my experience. I've yet to work with someone who's had a heart attack where we haven't found almost instantly what the psychological reason is. I became very good at that because my time was valuable in the NHS. I had often 24 patients to look after, so I didn't have the time to go through round the block. I had to cut to the chase, and I got pretty good at doing that.
So, Adam, you've been on this journey. You came to be known as the heart guy. What transpired from that time to what you're doing now? Because it seems to me that the combination between being known as the heart guy and working with ACE funding, it's seemingly diametrically opposed, but yet you do it. And if there's anybody that's going to do it, I can guarantee it's going to be Adam Shaw.
Well, thank you, Graham. I mean, the harsh reality was I left the health service because I was increasingly shocked by the things I was seeing, and I became increasingly vocal in speaking up against it. And the NHS is a big system, and if you ruffle feathers enough times, it can get very awkward to be in that environment, especially when people are dying because they don't want to keep people in A&E for 12 hours or more. And I saw that. This is the reality. I saw some shocking things. And I became quite vocal in expressing my concerns, which were generally swept under the carpet. So I had to leave, and I knew that I could make a difference with people with their psychology and working on their health issues. So I left the NHS without really having any sort of plan. I had a bit of savings. My grandparents left me some money when they died, and I just went out and trained myself. I went on all the courses I wanted to do. I trained in all sorts of things, from personal development to Reiki to working with energies, vortex healing, energetic NLP. I did all sorts of things, even stage presenting. All the courses, all my bucket list of training, if you like. Simultaneously, I thought, right, I'm here. Where's my clients? And it turned out I wasn't so good at marketing and running a business where it's a one-man band and you had to learn how to become an entrepreneur. I got lost in it, Graham, to be honest. I now have reached a stage where I know about accounts. I know about search engine optimization, which was alien to me, a website You know, I know how to edit content, edit videos, all of these skills I learned, but none of them were making me money. And the brutal fact was that me on my own, with no accountability except for myself, was a disaster in the business arena. When I met my now business partner, Richard Evans, he was a successful entrepreneur, and we got on really well. He invested in a business that didn't exist. And after 1 year of mentoring me, he realized that there was a lot of value in us two working together. So he said, why don't you come and work with me? Let's go out, let's make some money, and I'll show you how it's done, which he did with ACE Funding. We needed to find a business that would utilize both of our skill sets. And we went out and asked people what they were looking for. And about 99% of the people that came to us were looking for some sort of funding. So we got to know a lot of funders. We got to build up the relationships with them, investors. We met a lot of people in banks. We got to know entrepreneurs and people in the financial sector. And ironically, that detachment from my well-being stuff just enabled me to see business through a logical view rather than an emotional one. Because as you'll know yourself, when you put yourself into business and it doesn't work, it's about you, it's not about the business. And I was too emotionally attached to that business venture to make it work. And it affected my confidence, and a lot of things spiraled from that place. So now with ACE Funding, I don't have the emotional attachment to the business, and I found that I'm pretty good at listening, and my job is to matchmake, which really, it doesn't take rocket scientists to do that. And we now successfully connect funders to funding opportunities. And if they lead to funding, then we get paid, which is good. It's great. So I've been able to learn about business in a non-emotional environment. I learned to integrate those lessons. And now I believe I've reached a point that I've been detached from the heart guy well-being business for long enough that I can now go back objectively with my new business head on and my new set of entrepreneurial skills and make that brand work.
So what is it that you learnt as the heart guy that you use the most in business today?
That's a good question, Graham. To really value myself and my skill set, more so than anything else. When I first started doing this, I was meeting some huge investors, people that were sitting on funds with millions, sometimes billionaires. And it's very easy to, I've seen it. I've seen how certain people in those situations shrink because they don't feel they're on the same level as people that have all these billions of pounds. What gives me my edge, what helps me from this environment, is that I've worked with people with millions and billions of pounds as they're about to die. And that's nothing will create a level playing field like being able to cut to the chase in that environment. Because it doesn't matter how many billions you've got when you're facing death. You know, you're in my realm now. Makes me sound a bit like the Grim Reaper, but I've been in that situation, helping people through it on hundreds, if not thousands of occasions. And I guess I see through to the people. I don't put anyone else on a pedestal. And so I can treat everybody the same way when I'm in a business meeting. And I think that gives me an edge as the hard guy.
Well, I can tell you from my perspective, I've always looked up to you because I can see that you've witnessed life from a totally different perspective than the average person out there, including me. And you see life differently because of that. And that's why you became known as the heart guy.
I did, and I think it's important to point out too, Graham. You said spending time in a psychiatric realm would affect you. Well, it did affect me. I'm going to point out. Here's my disclaimer: I don't have the healthiest lifestyle. I really don't. I like to. My diet is not 100%, if I'm completely honest. No, I drink occasionally. I absolutely do drink alcohol, and even occasionally I smoke. There it is. It's all out there. What I do particularly well with that, I accept that part of me. You know, I don't judge it anymore. I'm not the one saying, oh, smoking's going to kill me. I looked after people in their 90s that smoked all their life. And the only thing different between them and the people that were dying was they grew up in an era where smoking was cool. It wasn't going to kill you every cigarette. And these people were more mobile than anyone else. So I don't really have the same reflection. I think our belief what forms our ultimate health and well-being. So if I have a big session, if I go drinking, I'll have a long walk the next day. I'll hydrate myself. I'll look after myself. I'll balance the books, if you like. I'll eat healthier. Now, I wouldn't do all of that if I hadn't been out drinking. So what I can now do is tie in something not healthy with something healthy and bring that balance to my life. So rather than see anything unhealthy as a problem, I now see it as an opportunity, as a catalyst to balance the books in another way. And I suppose that is really how I've learned to look at life. Working in a psychiatric hospital, living in a psychiatric hospital, and growing up in a psychiatric hospital, I think the biggest gift that's given me is that I don't judge people. I might do occasionally for small periods, but I think on the big scale of things, my judgment level is low. Everybody has a clean slate before they start talking to me, and we take it from there. You either go up in my estimations or you go down. That's just life, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that if there's a theme that's running right throughout all of these interviews or discussions, is that people who are feeling empowered have come to this realization that acceptance is a major key, and acceptance is really non-judgment.
Yeah.
So it's just what I've noticed as a general trend, and you've covered them so beautifully today.
Well,
Adam,
thank you.
Before we wind up, is there something that just comes to mind that you could leave the viewers with that would enable them to be more empowered?
Well, what I'd say, Graham, is always about who you spend time with. And so many people get caught in ruts and it becomes very samey. If life isn't working for you, if things aren't working out, if you've hit that all-time low, you're actually quite lucky. The luckiest people, I think, are the ones that have had that nervous breakdown. They've been the other side of judgment. One of my best friends is a psychiatric nurse, and he's an incredible psychiatric nurse, not because he's learned lots of people, but because he's also been the other side of the divide for a couple of years. He knows what it's like to be a patient in the system, and so he's far better positioned to help them. So I would say it's often the people that everyone else is judging that can give you your big breakthrough. And give everybody the time of day, listen to everybody's story, be present. One thing that I've just probably learned to listen would be the best thing that I could give anybody. So many people love to talk, so many people are waiting to get their next sentence out. There's nothing more distressing for me than somebody that I know isn't listening to me. In fact, I just walk away these days or call them on it. So become a good listener. When you become a good listener, you're at the platform of non-judgment and understanding.
Being present mean to you, Adam?
Being present for me, Graham, I've done a few woo-woo things in my time. I use the word woo-woo because a few of my friends used to say that to me. Oh, it's another one of Adam's woo-woo courses that he's on. It really, you know, I went to one course. It was on channeling. I'd seen people that could channel higher entities, and I thought that was a really cool thing to do. So I went to learn how to be a channel, and I realized through that course that being a channel only involves being completely present with somebody, with giving them all of your attention. That means if you're on the phone, you're not checking your emails as well. You're actually listening to what people have got to say. You're feeling what they've got to say. And often in that moment, if you're completely present and you listen to what people have to say, a higher intelligence will come through you. If you've ever been in that pure listening zone, you'll often come out with advice, and then when you finish saying it, you'll think, where did that come from? You know, this isn't anything that I've ever thought about before in my life, yet I've just said something completely profound. And that can help people. That is what being present is. When you're present, you will be a better listener, and you will be a better friend. You'll be a better person, because people know that you're being listened to, even if they're having a go at you. The worst thing is to walk away. Let them say their thing first, then walk away if you have to, and say, we'll talk about it later. Just be present for people, and that probably is the best piece of advice that I can give anybody. I mean, if they're pissing you off, then walk away by all means. But if you want the best out of people, get used to listening. Stop thinking about what you're going to say next. Just listen and take it from there.
Great. Well, I tell you what, Adam, you've got me hooked in, because I truly think that I've been present, because I've just been sitting on the edge of my seat during this conversation. And I'd just like to thank you. I think you are a man of great wisdom, and I wish you all the best with your adventure. Is there anywhere people can go to look up about the ACE? What is it? ACE
funding. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've a couple of websites, Graham, but I'm going to point out two. I mean, the acefunding.org website is for businesses that are looking for funding, or for investors that are looking to invest and looking for great projects. That's what that does. It's very simple. We run events and we make introductions. And the other site, my personal site, is adamshaw.co. And on there is a free video e-course that just gives people a little bit of help, a few video tips from me, just telling you how to add a little bit of balance on your life, reduce your judgment, and get rid of a little bit of guilt. Very useful. So I really appreciate this, and thank you.
So we'll have those both of those websites available in iTunes, and people will be able to contact you. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining the Be Empowered show today. I'm your host, Graham Hopkins, and I think you'll agree that we've been totally blessed with our conversation today with Adam. Before we go, I'd just like to ask the viewers to do me a special favour in adding a review in iTunes, and that will increase the ratings of this show, and the message will start to get out to a lot more people. If you'd like to learn more about the concepts that Adam and I have shared today, like feeling more connected, having a peaceful heart, being in the flow, and being inspired, you can always go to Amazon and download my book called The Manifesto of the Inspirational Mind. Or you can go to my website called www.group.com and download a free ebook there called Know Your True Value and Worth. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Adam Shaw, for being our guest today, and we both wish you a wonderful future of freedom, peace and abundance. Remember, change your energy, change your life.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Be Empowered podcast. For more on regaining your power by bridging that gap between who you think you are right now and who you really are, go to www.beempoweredgroup.com and enter your name and email address to receive a free ebook and get notified of any upcoming podcasts. Remember, when you know and feel connected to your spiritual mind, you master your world. Changing your energy transforms your life.